In this review video, we're going to cover the components of experimental design. So in this experiment, we have a local professor who's interested in determining whether sitting in the front of the class causes a student's grade to increase. He chooses a higher level math class comprised of 20 juniors and 20 seniors to conduct an experiment. The class is a large lecture hall with 20 seats per row, and the professor plans to block off all available seating aside from the first and last rows. Since it's more difficult to see from the back of this large lecture hall, the professor will project himself onto a large screen. Now, when we design an experiment, we want to make sure we include the four main components. The first is randomization, second is replication, third is control, and fourth is optional depending on if it's required by the design, which is blocking. When we look at an experiment, we want to be able to identify when each of these four components is included and how it actually benefits the design of the experiment. So for part A, we're going to explain why it's important to randomly assign students to seats rather than letting them choose themselves. So obviously, you probably realize that if we let students choose themselves, we might have a certain type of student who's more likely to sit in the front and a certain type of student who's more likely to sit in the back. When we explain this, we want to explain two things to get full credit on an FRQ. So first, we want to note generally why randomization is important, but we also want to support it with the explanation. Typically, when you have the right answer without a valid explanation, you won't get any points for it. So that explain is really the key component of your answer. So to start, randomization minimizes or eliminates the effects of unknown or unwanted sources of variation. In other words, this is going to get rid of confounding variables. Now, we've said why it's important, but we haven't explained why it's important, which is this next part. If students were allowed to choose their own seats, they may self-select themselves into groups that influence the response variable, which in this case is their grade. For example, it's possible that the students who choose to sit in the front are more likely to participate and ask questions, which could be another explanation as to why they get higher grades. So again, we're noting why randomization is important, and then supporting it with our explanation. Make sure you have both of those parts in your answer. Next, how does this design incorporate replication, and what are the benefits? Replication is just the fact that we have multiple subjects assigned to each treatment. In this example, we have 40 students in total, so 20 are assigned to the front of the room and 20 are assigned to the back of the room. That's the replication and the fact that we have more than just one student in the front and one student in the back. Just like the randomization problem, this is our description of what replication is, but then we have to explain it and support it with an in-context explanation. So we'll have an average of 20 scores from the front and the back, and that average is going to give us a better estimate of what the true mean grade is for each of those two groups, those sitting in the front and sitting in the back. In addition to that, as we increase our sample size, that's going to decrease the standard deviation for each of these groups. Okay? And as that standard deviation goes down, it's going to allow us to better see, is there actually a difference between the grades of the student who sit in the front and sit in the back. Next up, give an example of the professor controlling for outside sources of variation and explain why it's necessary. Now, when we run this experiment, our ultimate goal is to see, does sitting in the front actually make a difference? Is it just the choice of seat that causes your grade to increase? Now, if it's more difficult to see in the back, it's really not the seat, it's the vision that's affecting your grade. So we're going to neutralize that source of variation by projecting the professor and his lecture on the large screen in front of the room. If he didn't take this step, we have two possible explanations for why the grades may be different between those two groups. It could be because of the seat they chose, or it could be because of their vision and how difficult or how well they could see the actual lecture. So when we have a variable that could affect that response variable, we want to make sure we control it. So the only difference between the two groups is the assigned treatment. Okay, this is the ultimate purpose of our experiment here. Okay, and controlling makes sure that the only difference across those groups is the treatment we're assigning. And lastly, give an example of a variable that the professor could use for blocking and explain how that is beneficial to the experiment. When we choose a blocking variable, we want to choose a variable that we think could affect the response variable, in this case the grade, and we're blocking on the variable in a way that puts similar students together. So the obvious variable in this problem is the grade level. We're going to put all the juniors together and all the seniors together because we expect that could have an effect on their grade in the course. Now, make sure we explain why that's the case. So it's possible that juniors haven't had as many math classes as the seniors, so this course could prove a little more difficult. Or conversely, maybe the seniors are less motivated as they approach graduation and they won't do as well. So we want to make sure that each grade level is split equally across our treatment. So amongst the 20 juniors, we have half in the front, half in the back, and same thing with the seniors. That way, the variable of grade level is spread across both our treatment groups in the sense that they will equal each other out, and the only difference across the two groups is really where their seat was. This is going to give a better estimate of how the seating placement is affecting that overall grade.